Bonsoir. Bonsoir. Merci d'être venu en nombre. Moi, je m'appelle Robin Philpot, Robin Philpot, c'est comme vous voulez. Je suis éditeur de Baraka Books. Une maison d'édition, on existe depuis 17 ans. Et je vais commencer par remercier Alex de Pulp Books de nous avoir reçus ici. C'est un des endroits très agréables ici à Verdun. Aussi, j'aimerais remercier les auteurs de Baraka Books qui sont ici. I'm going to start. There are quite a few of them, and it's worth recognizing their contribution and the fact I'd like to thank them for trusting Baraka Books with their manuscripts, because it's always a work done at home all by themselves, and it's when they confide in, or quand ils confient un manuscrit, we take it very seriously. We know that it's a work of their heart and their soul. They spent time and they're committing themselves, and so I really appreciate that. And there are a number here, so I hope I don't miss any, but Carolyn Swade has published 2 books with us. Yasmin Haddad, do you want to see? Published in 2017, and then Looking for Her, which is a sequel, but she won't say it as a sequel, somewhat of a sequel, published in 2024. Fred Anderson, I asked Fred to stand up, who it's Eyes Have Seen. All these books are available here, I think. So, Eyes Have Seen from Mississippi to Montreal. It is an absolutely wonderful book that talks about his experience as a young boy at the age of 15 who joined the civil rights movement at 15, SNCC as they call it, SNCC, and was in it for 4 years until he was drafted. They were trying to destroy SNCC, and he fled to Montreal in �66 with Bob Moses and Herman Carter, who also came here. His story is absolutely moving, a wonderfully moving story that just has recently reviewed by Ishmael Reed, if you may know him. Ishmael Reed, a great African-American writer, and he says this is ranks very high among people who describe the civil rights fight. And so anyway, Fred's here. Judy Reaver, and I said, I'm going to speak briefly about Traction. Judy Reaver wrote a wonderful book called In Praise of Blood, The Crimes of the RPF, published in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, published again in French, won awards, nominated for others. And she just recently produced one of our chapbooks, our Traction books, and as we say, they're small books. I'll play them briefly. Rwanda's 30-year assault on Congo, the crimes of criminals, and the cover-up. It came out in March, and it's one I'll speak shortly about Traction after that. We have Leila Marshy, who is to be the future associate publisher of Baraka Books, but she's also an author and has got 2 books out. Came out last year, 3 books in fact, but 2 with us. My Fever of the People and Raising Palestine, Punishing Solidarity and Dissent in Canada. These 2 books are also available. And then we have, I won't call her the name of her title, Elizabeth Ball, whose novel coming, it's called Missy Why Not? WHYNAUGHT, not why not, which is a real name apparently in New Brunswick. And it's a novel that's coming out this fall. I think that's all the authors we have here. But anyway, I want to thank them for that. Traction is a great publishing adventure that Leila and I developed during a conversation saying that we have to find a way to address burning issues like we have going on in the day. The world is moving so quickly, and we don't, you don't have sometimes a book that would take 3 or 4 years to write, and and is too long. Sometimes you can't answer quickly. So we thought we've got to get books about 100 pages long addressing these burning issues. And this year we have 4 of them out. Now, as I said, you can put them in your pocket. They're not expensive. And you address burning subjects by people who know the subject very well. The first 2, Zionism Decoded in 101 Quotes by Yaakov Rabkin, who's one of the world's renowned experts on Zionism and how Zionists have hijacked Judaism. I'm summarizing it very briefly, but he is a well-known author and authority on the subject. He was interviewed by Jeffrey Sachs when the book came out, and the book just all over the world. They wanted to publish in other languages and so on. And Judy's book, they both came out March 1st. We want short, sharp, to-the-point books by authorities on the issues, and to get them out relatively quickly because we know that people know how to write them. I'll leave the last 2 books to Leila and to present the authors for tonight. Once again, Leila's Trouble, apparently. I just read something about her and about traction, and the guy saw her name and said, "Oh, she's trouble." So, trouble like that, we want more of it. So,
Yeah.
Anyway, Leila, I'll let her take over.
Trouble is
Thank you very
good.
much for your attention.
Thanks, Robin. I feel like I want to stand. So thank you for coming. Very nice to see everybody here. We're very proud of the Traction series, and we're very excited about these 2 books coming out. They both, in their own way, each in different ways, address and grapple with our place in the world, our place in history, and the premises that we agree upon or don't. And they both, in their own way, ask, what the hell have we done, and what the heck are we going to do about it? Mark Abley is a nonfiction writer, journalist, editor, and poet. His most recent books are Strange, Bewildering Time, Istanbul to Kathmandu in the Last Year of the Hippie Trail, and an updated edition of the groundbreaking Conversations with a Dead Man, Indigenous Rights, and the Legacy of Duncan Campbell Scott. One of his earlier books, Spoken Here, Travels Among Threatened Languages, was shortlisted for Writers' Trust Nonfiction Prize and the Grand Prix du Livre de Montréal. And my favorite book of yours is not in your bio, but it's the Organist, about your father and his organ playing and family relationships. It's a beautiful book. Peter McFarlane is a Canadian author, journalist, and editor. His published works include Northern Shadows, Canadians and Central America, Brotherhood to Nationhood, George Manuel and the Making of the Modern Indian Movement, and Ancient Land, Ancient Sky, which he co-authored. He has edited a number of award-winning books, and in 2024 he wrote the very timely Family Ties, How a Ukrainian Nazi and a Living Witness Link Canada to Ukraine Today. He lives in the Mansions. We're very happy to have them both. Numb and Last Call to Canada are, I think, very important books, and as Judy Reaver so beautifully put it just in conversation earlier, they crystallize the moment. And I think being inundated and overwhelmed, as Mark gets into, by information and the movement of politics in every which way, we need things to be crystallized for us. So how I'm going to go about it, I'll ask them each questions, and I have a few questions for the 2 of you together, and then we can open it up and ask questions and just basically have a conversation about 2 really scintillating books. I always use scintillating very sarcastically, but it's seriously scintillating. So Mark, you open Numb and you return to this creature with a account of the quagga, which I'd never heard of, a now extinct kind of zebra, and its later years in various zoos in the world. And I just wanted to talk about why you chose the quagga, why this was important for you to begin talking about Numb and the politics of Overwhelm.
Thank you, Layla. Can everyone hear me if I speak at this level? Okay, I'll try to remember to keep speaking at this level. Before I answer that question, I want to say three things. First of all, it's a great joy to be published by a firm as efficient and passionate as Baraka. Alors, je veux remercier Robin et Leila aussi. Et je veux remercier le Club de Hockey Canadien.
Yeah.
Because they could have played on Thursday night, but no, they arranged it to play on Wednesday and Friday, so there's this overflow crowd here, so I'm very grateful for that. And the third thing I just want to say is that it's coming up to the 1 year anniversary of the death of one of my closest friends, the writer Dennis Sampson, and I'm very honored that his wife Gay and daughter Anna are here tonight, and I'm really, really thankful for that. Now, as for the quagga, Layla, when you asked me if I would be interested in writing something for Traction, and what came to mind was the feeling of being, of fighting against being psychologically overwhelmed that I was experiencing last year, and that I think a lot of people were experiencing, and this is something that had been growing for many years as a result of social media, climate change, the war in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, and then particularly the Trump administration. And I was aware that I was not reacting with the usual sense of immediate outrage that I had once felt. I was aware that I was not reacting with the usual determination that I sometimes felt in my youth to try and do something about that. Instead, I was just feeling it's one damn thing after another. So that was the topic I proposed to you, but I really didn't have any idea of where I was going to go with it. And as a result of having once been a poet, or having written a lot of poetry in the past, I knew that in order to make the feelings come to life, so to speak, I needed to find an image. So I started working from the image, and the image that came to mind was this kind of this brownish, thinly striped zebra, which had died in London Zoo in 1878, having been captured in 1851. And I remember seeing pictures of this creature online. And the more I thought about it, the more the quagga seemed to symbolize in a way what I was feeling all the time. I wasn't going into abject, total suicidal depression or anything, but I was thinking of what it must have been like for the quagga to be deprived of its freedom, deprived of all other animals of its kind, having no agency, having no autonomy whatsoever, simply existing in a foreign environment, brick walls, stone floors, people coming to stare at it. And I thought, what do I see in the eyes of the photographs of this animal? And what I felt I saw was a sort of numbness. And so I began chapter 1, the first section of the book is about the quagga, and then, as you say, I come back to it later and say later on that the one thing the quagga in London Zoo could not do was resist, and that what we need to do, if we can, is to find ways of resistance.
Mm-hmm. Oh, she got shy. Peter, let's segue resistance. One of the more mind-blowing things to me reading Last Call for Canada was the realization, I mean, I vaguely knew this, but you talk about Canada as always having been a client state, essentially junior partner. How do you put it? I can't find it. But yeah, a client state to first the UK and then the US.
To the most dominant imperial powers of the world. We were, for most of our history, junior partner, first the British and then the Americans. So that is.
But we fool ourselves by not understanding this about ourselves and not seeing that. I was wondering if you could talk about that, and also about Lament for a Nation, which was very popular and important in its time, and I'm very glad you bring it back into for people to follow up on it.
Yeah, the George Grant book, Lament for a Nation, it was a very important book at the time, and it's also very prescient. The way it describes the Canadian elite at the time, they're very much the same. And I think the idea is we have an elite that does sort of go along to get along with what the imperial center does. It's part of our history. It's baked into us. It's baked into them, and this is the elite, anyways. And Lament for a Nation focuses on the period when Canada moved from kind of the British orbit into the American orbit in early 1960s. There was the election of called the Bullmark missile election, where the Americans were trying to install Bullmark missiles in Canada, and the Diefenbaker government refused. And what some historians call now, it was a kind of a soft coup against the Diefenbaker government by the Kennedy administration and working with the Pearson. They would have secret meetings in the embassy press briefings. They brought NATO generals over to Canada, called Diefenbaker a liar, that sort of thing. So the history of our sort of movement into the orbit of the Americans sort of began at that point. And since then, there were the free trade agreements in 1988 and again in 2019. And it's been a steady movement by our elites making sort of transactional deals with the Americans to get more access to market, but they're cutting off slices of sovereignty as they go. And that was the point of George Grant. He, at that point, said we were headed to be a vassal state of the Americans, and I think it was a little early to make the call. But when you look at what's happened in the last 60 years, actually, with the free trade agreements, and also in the 2000s, Canada began fighting directly American wars in Libya and in Afghanistan, something we had never done before. There were peacekeepers, et cetera, before. So it's been a movement in that direction, and it's actually continued at an accelerated pace, I think, in the last few years. And
Well, we'll get back to that, and we'll return to Carney and truth versus reality. Mark, you refer a couple of times to Trump, which made me chuckle, as the convicted criminal in the White House. You don't name him a couple of times. We know exactly who you're talking about. What does that do for Americans and us peripherally and the world to know that we are subject to this kind of insane leadership chaos, like psychologically, psychically? It's like a weird, absurdist, play, Sartre, Samuel Beckett,
Yeah, Samuel Beckett never wrote anything quite like Donald Trump. I made the deliberate decision not to name the man, but if I can just quote very briefly from the first time that he appears in the book. What I say is, I recall a speech given before the General Assembly of the United Nations in September 2025. And then I just start quoting, "You're destroying your countries. They're being destroyed. Europe is in serious trouble. They've been invaded by a force of illegal aliens like nobody's ever seen before. Your countries are going to hell. They've said this is a disaster, what's happening. They were going all green. All green is all bankrupt. I'm here to tell the truth. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I'm in New York City. If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail, and I'm really good at predicting things." I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true. I've been right about everything. That's only a portion of what I quote, and believe me, I could have quoted a lot more. It's not the criminality. It's not the fact that Donald Trump has been convicted in an American court. I'm sure there were lots of world leaders who should have been convicted in various courts and haven't been. But it's the very peculiar personality of the US president, and the fact that he holds and takes great joy in in the power that is at his disposal, and the fact that it's very hard to find ways to cope with that. And I had an interesting reaction. I wrote to a few friends in the United States when I was in the process of writing the book, because I was curious to know what they'd say. And I quoted a couple of writer friends who live in San Francisco, one of whom, Julie Brooke, maybe is a former Montrealer, whom a few of you may know. But I also wrote to a friend of mine in Boston named Dan Penrice, and Dan sent me a very learned reply and advised me to read Marshall McLuhan, which was very useful for the book. But he did say at the time, this was October, November last year, that he wasn't feeling particularly numb. He was feeling determined, and he was feeling that there were things that had to be done to resist. And then I sent him a copy of the book because I'm grateful to him for having suggested I read McLuhan, and I got an email back from him today saying kind of ruefully, well, I've read the book and I think you're right. I feel much number now than I did. And it wasn't just the reading of my book that had done this. It crystallized something for him, that the daily outrage, the daily torrent of poison, misinformation of various kinds, outrages. I mean, I'm not going to pick out one thing or 10 things from among hundreds of things. And yet we have no choice but to be inured to that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the reason psychologically why I wanted to get my own thoughts in order. And the writing of a book, even a short one, is a great way to get one's thoughts in order. I highly recommend it if any of you are feeling as mixed up as I was last summer. Nothing like a book to clarify matters. And so I think that's a very pervasive sense of outrage for which Donald Trump is not the only cause, but certainly one cause.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to talk about China. All my life, anyways, in school and in the media, we were really taught to fear China, to deride China, to just leave China out of the equation. Mm-hmm. And I think with the curtain being pulled back against American propaganda, I think a lot of people are seeing China. Also China as, you say some really fascinating things about China. I just want to quote, you quote Adam Tooze several times, the director of the European Institute. China is the master key to understanding modernity. I was wondering if you could talk about China and also the incident with the Huawei CEO, and this is also an example of us just buying hook, line, and sinker the American line and the damage that does, but also China.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, that was a very interesting moment in Canadian history when we decided to kidnap the vice president of Huawei. I think the Americans had asked Mexico and I forget a European country. Belgium, yeah. They had asked them to arrest her, and they refused because she'd actually done not committed a crime in Canada. She had not committed any act that was a crime in Canada. This was something that was cooked up in the States because they wanted to grab her, and we grabbed her. Within a week, Trump admitted that he would let her go if he got the trade deal with China. He would, he had. They were trying to take her to the United States, and he said, "No, we'll say they can let her go." And so it was basically a kidnapping, and she was being held hostage. And of course, after that, China grabbed the two Michaels, and our relations with China just completely collapsed. But what is also more interesting is go back a year. Justin Trudeau was in Beijing, and he was actually negotiating a free trade deal with China. That was one of the things he got elected on, was better relations with China and Russia and recognize Iran. But it was in December, I guess, 2016 that he was negotiating the trade deal with China. But the first Trump came into power in 2017, January, whatever. And they immediately identified China as a rival and as a threat to the United States. They released a document stating that. And it was then that Trudeau completely broke off relations because the Americans he knew that he would not be able to negotiate a free trade deal with China if the Americans had put them on the negative list. And so the thing just tipped over from that until we ended up kidnapping the head of Huawei to follow the Americans on China. And it's interesting because Canadian Prime Minister did not visit China until Carney did. That's 8-9 years later. And Carney didn't visit China until after Trump visited China and met with the Chinese, I think in South Korea in 2025, right? They met. So this is really a good example about how Canadian foreign policy is put together, that we went from negotiating a free trade deal to absolutely collapsing our relations just because the American changed their view of China. So,
yeah, it's a great example of like a push me, pull you.
Yeah.
I just want to say, Peter just came back from a month in China.
That's right.
So if you have any questions.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Mark, I want to talk about shock and awe. We all remember Bush's assault on Iraq and the Donald Rumsfeld, I think, who called it shock and awe. That was their strategy. They were going to use shock and awe so they are intimidated, made to feel impotent, so helpless that they have no choice but to do what we want them to do. That was their definition of shock and awe. And that was wartime, and I feel like we are casualties of war still, and this war is still ongoing. That shock and awe really is what's happening technically, politically.
I guess one of the reasons I wrote this book was an attempt to fight back against that feeling, you know? I mean, that was very much a military doctrine, and I think it was an Air Force general who promulgated it. Rumsfeld was the one who had this very interesting concept of known knowns, unknown knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns, and so on. Are we still under shock and awe? Honestly, you know, what I feel as a Canadian, someone in the rich part of the world, I'm sure people in many, many, many other countries are subject to shock and awe militarily or economically or whatever. But what I feel shock and awe looking at or coming my way most viscerally is AI. Because the concept of shock and awe as the US military promulgated it in 2003 was, like you said, to make sure there was a sense of people being unable to fight back. And this tends to be how I feel about AI, that regardless of the politics of it, regardless of the beliefs of the very small number of multi-billionaires or soon perhaps a trillionaire who are leading the charge, regardless of all that, the technology is already having and going to have tremendous impacts. And I don't think it's just my age, because I know that my son, for example, who's in his 30s in Regina, has struggled very much to find work, and a lot of the jobs that he might otherwise be looking for are just not available now because AI is already beginning to take them away. And how does one cope with that? That's what I don't know. But I do want to say there are elements of hope, I think, in this book. But when it comes to AI, that is where I find great trouble seeing the possibilities for a way out, if you like.
Yeah, AI is very daunting, and I mean, we're just at the beginning of it. It's very hard to know. It's very hard to predict. Oops, where's my page? You talk about a little bit, and I think it's been in the news, and it's the big hope for Canada, which is Carney's One Economy Bill, C5, and that is ostensibly to take off, to remove provincial trade barriers. and allow provinces to trade in a way that we haven't done before, which really has been silly all along. But I'm wondering what you think of that, if you trust Carney in the long run. And you talk about his speech at Davos, which was a very stirring speech, but most people didn't listen to the whole thing, and you describe it as a very rambling speech at the very end, eventually. So
the first part of the speech, it was a very important a moment, I think, for Carney, and he got a lot of praise for it, and he deserved it, because in the first part of the speech, he admitted that the rules-based order really was basically a fraud, and people had known that it was a way that we could avoid international law. Instead of obeying international law, we invented this rule-based order. We make the rules, and other people have to follow them, and that's basically what an imperial system does. And so, but the second part of his speech, there was a lot of questioning and criticism of it, because he went on to say that the solution would be the middle powers getting together, and they together could set a new agenda. And I think some of the people at the conference said this was something like Canadian view, Canadian characteristics. It's Atlanticism with Canadian characteristics. They were kind of mocking it, and the major economists of the world who looked at this, and political scientists said that that's not how the world works. Middle powers don't set the agenda. There's just no way. And I think both the left and right economists found that. They even described it as silly and Davos talk, because it offered nothing, and it was so it was a kind of a spectacular speech, but it offered no solutions. And it seems that Carney's strategy is kind of to speak loudly and carry a little stick, and that's basically what he's been doing for the last a year and a half. His elbows go up, and while his elbows are up, or he's talking about elbows up, he's giving away a massive amounts of Canadian sovereignty. The most important, one of the most important capitulations in Canadian history was adopting the Trump demand of 5% of the GDP on military spending. Well, that's an additional $100 billion a year he's adding to Canadian budget in military spending. It's insane. And he also, total Canada's spending on social programs is about $200 billion. And he's going to take half of that and put it into military spending. It really made no sense. And this is NATO is doing it, most countries except, I guess, Spain. And within 2 weeks of that, this is again just off his elbows up period, Trump tweeted something about he would not do a trade deal with Canada as long as it had the digital services tax in place. That's a 3% tax on the big companies, I guess it's Meta and Google, that sort of thing. And within 24 hours, Canada announced it was withdrawing that tax. It was giving the money back to the big companies and paying them interest. And that money, those were $7 billion a year. That was supposed to support Canadian culture.
Yeah.
And he removed it on a tweet 24 hours later, after a tweet by Trump. And that has been continuing. I think it was 2 weeks ago, he said that they would synchronize our airports with the Americans and privatize them. And there was an amazing article in the Breach magazine that the Americans are buying up all our mining in the the rare earth mineral mines. They're buying all the properties with the assistance of the Canadian government, with the encouragement of the Canadian government, and they're buying the whole sector. And so this is where I think we see that the two-sided or two-faced element of Carney. He knows how to play the crowd. He knows how to use these silly metaphors and elbows up, and Canadians respond because they are upset. But at the same time, he's double dealing. He's cutting the pieces off, and he's of our sovereignty, and at a really accelerated rate.
You don't think he's playing some savvy long game?
No, I don't think, because what it seems his game is that he's going to be in the negotiations at Kuzma very soon, and what he seems determined to do is give away everything before Kuzma, and so then when he signs the deal with Kuzma, he can say, I gave away nothing, because there will be nothing there. But there's not a lot left when you look at what he's given in the last year.
Yeah. It's so distressing. Mark, you talk about fight, flight, and fawn as reactions to trauma and stress, and then you say that we don't do any of those. What we do is freeze. What's happening now politically, for example, hearing all this about Canada's reaction to Trump. I mean, we're just freezing. We're just kind of being overwhelmed, and it feels to me that we are casualties of war, but a sort of undeclared war.
I don't know if I really say that, Leila. I'm talking about fight and flight, and then freeze, more in psychological terms, in terms of people experiencing a kind of psychic numbness. But maybe you're right, maybe Peter's right, that there is an element of numbness in our response. I'm really not sure I don't altogether see that, to be honest. I guess I'm prepared to hope against hope that there is a bit more of the long game being played.
I think that's what Canadians are trusting.
That's what we want to
so
believe,
far,
yeah,
yes.
certainly. And the response to the Davos speech from various European countries was certainly positive. So when you see deals happening like the one with Germany for liquefied natural gas, maybe to some extent that's a sort of medium-term result of that kind of rhetoric. Anyway, I certainly hope the Canadian government has something in mind other than freezing or fawning, because I think what you were describing is more fawning than freezing.
Yeah. How do we resist this? Like, how do we coalesce as individuals, as communities, as political movements to kind of make sure we stay on the path we want to stay on? I'm asking both of you in terms of, how do we resist?
You go first, Peter.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's very difficult because we're getting false images of what the issues are and what the problem is. I think the Canadians, the people of Canada, have shown they're very strong on the issue of certainly annexation. I think it was 60% in a poll said they'd pick up a gun if the Americans tried to annex Canada. But that's not really going to be the issue, I don't think. It's not going to be a Canadian Anschluss where the Americans come in and dismantle the border posts, and then the military comes in a motorcade with Trump in the back to take over Canada. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be done, I think, piece by piece, and that's what makes it so difficult. There's a will to resist, but how do you resist a trade deal? And interestingly, in the election in 1963, the Beaumark missile election, and in the free trade election of 1988, the parties got, I think, about 40% of the vote, the ones that wanted the deals. And they still managed to get them through, the free trade, on 40% of the vote. And the same thing with the Beaumark missiles. That there's a structural problem in Canada. That the elites control all the newspapers, et cetera, and all the heights of the economy. And they have an enormous amount of power. It's very hard. Can't say that it's not doable, but it's very hard to first focus on what the real issue is, and then actually mobilize the people, because they're smart at the other end, and they do it. Again, it's a transactional thing with our sovereignty that the people are not aware of, and right now the Canadian elites, they're very deeply embedded in the States. One thing I in the research I found very surprising is that Americans have in direct investment in Canada $700 billion. Canadians have 1.3 trillion invested in the United States. That it's not something that our elites are going to walk away from. That they're going to make sure they have access to the American market and the American capital markets, and so I'm not sure how you mobilize. We've got a government that is at least mildly leftist, and it's off to a good, not a government, a party that's at least mildly leftist now. I'm talking about Abbey Lewis and the NDP, who's off to a good start, and I think he can mobilize people, and he's a good communicator. Yeah. It's a possible through that route, and he's very aware of the issues that we've been speaking of here.
Leila, you mentioned before that you might like me to read a short passage.
Sure, yeah.
So to answer your question, I'm going to read this passage, which is from near
Great.
the end of the book, not the very end, but this is just 3 paragraphs from close to the end of the book. I've always tried to think globally. I used to take pride in my knowledge of what was going on in Afghanistan and Uruguay and Tanzania. Yet today I wonder if that knowledge is anything more than thinly disguised narcissism. Thinking at a distance carries no responsibility. Perhaps we need not just to act locally, but to think locally. That's the position Jane Goodall reached in her final years. In 2022, an interviewer for the Narwhal asked her, "Why do you think so many people seem to be giving up hope these days?" "If you just look around the world," Goodall replied, "then you can't help but lose hope. I mean, you have feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. If you look at what's happening politically, socially, environmentally." She gave a few grim examples. "But," she went on, "when people come to me and say they're losing hope or they've lost hope, I say, well, stop looking all around the world and think about where you are, or some project that you really care about, and roll up your sleeves and do something about that. Admittedly, it seems impossible to resist the onrush of AI, yet in other respects, we're not powerless. We can take positive actions in our own neighborhood, our own community. We can close our eyes and ears to fake news, and we can stop doom scrolling. We can show love for people we know and refuse to let our solidarity with others send us spiraling into depression. We can cherish and protect fragments of the non-human world. We can laugh. We can attempt to resist tyranny, and in doing so, we will also resist numbness."
That's beautiful. I'm going to open it up for questions. I think that's a good place to, Peter, unless did you want to read something or
No.
Yeah. I really recommend these books. They are fantastic. And if anybody has questions or something they would like to add to the conversation. Yes, Andre.
Yeah. This past Tuesday, Carolyn and I went to a panel discussion on Hungary about the mafia state and Orban's loss. And one of the things that the panelists were talking about, that this numbness is not just what you experience, it's what's being actually worked on you. That this is not an accident, not our own feelings. This was planned as part of their power elite. And the term that they used, and I think it applies to the state, is the mafia state. And the structure of the mafia, and part of it is the concentration on information that will get you numb. And their response was to throw Orban out. It reached the idea that he had reached a peak that he couldn't go beyond, the people weren't buying it anymore. And one of the things that he mentioned was that this was possible in an autocratic society because there was still the semblance of other parties. And I think this was Trump's working to eliminate in the States, but I think this is why something like the NDP needs to be there and be questioning not what they're being told, but where it's coming from and why it's coming from there. So this numbness thing, I think, is not only just a feeling, but you're being brainwashed or worked on, and that's part of the battle as to how do you resist that when the media is being taken over.
Sure, I'll give a short answer, and then I'd love to hear what you say too, Peter. I quote Steve Bannon in 2018, one of Trump's favorite ideologues, who said the media is the enemy, and how we cope with the media is to flood the zone with shit. And that's a really good strategy, because it means stuff is coming at us all the time.
24/7.
Yeah, and some of it is true. And that's the problem. If it was all lies, it would be much easier to deal with, but a certain portion of it is true. But especially for those who don't follow the news particularly closely, who aren't particularly highly educated or whatever, it becomes very, very hard to distinguish truth from absolute falsehood. And so inevitably, I think that does lead to, that leads to numbness.
No, just with the media, I think you really have to look at many different sources of the media. You can't just, if you just, even the CBC, which is a really good organization, it has a narrative, and it will tell you the narrative, and it won't go too far off the narrative. That's how media works these days. And so if that's all you listen to is the CBC, which is the best of it, maybe a bad lot, you're going to get really distortions about the world. I think you have to look at a big variety. I think you should read, if you have the time and the inclination, read news from the enemy states, the Russian RT, read the China Daily News and the CBC and the CNN. That's the only way to get any sense of what's going on in the world by trying to see. You can kind of see what's the truth in the narrow middle of that type
including Fox News.
Yeah, the Fox News. Yeah. I would say you have to Fox News. It's bizarre and humorous, but yeah, there's probably something there that we're missing. I think the right wing is really interesting because often they identify the problem very well, and they just have the most bizarre and stupid solutions. That it's not a bad idea to look at the right wing because they often do uncover problems, issues.
Can I ask that? Well, Leila mentioned this question that it's, Canada's a nation with nations within. Mm-hmm. And if right now they have this national interest policy and a law where they're going to do things that they couldn't do 5 years ago, 5 years ago. They couldn't, they're going to put pipelines through, GNL, build a port in Montreal and everything. And in Canada, there are nations. There's Quebec, there are First Nations. And in general, Canada tends to think it can go on without even talking with these people. They've all joined, we'll all found a common cause, but it doesn't work that way. So I wonder if you'd address this question, because I know you've worked with First Nations. You're also very aware of Quebec's situation. But Canada's a vassal state. So here they're trying to pretend they're not a vassal state. But it's got to take somehow. Canada has to address these questions.
It's really interesting. Is the question, of course, of the role of Indigenous people, First Nations especially. It's not sure. What happened is the Trudeau government actually was very bad for Indigenous people. In one sense, is that if you remember under Harper, there was Idle No More sprang up because it was absolutely outrageous what he was doing, his bills against the environment and the water bills and things like that. And so they did rise up. But the Trudeau government, Justin Trudeau government, the Liberals are very clever on this. I have a friend, Russell Dybel, who's very involved in the movement, a Mohawk guy, and he says the Liberals are dangerous because they have a SWAT team, and the SWAT team is the special words and tactics, and the Liberals get into power. The next thing you know, they have
special words and tactics.
SWAT team, and when they get into power, the first thing they do is change the meaning of, let's say, self-government into something that resembles self-government. It sounds like self-government, but it's really municipal government, and they offer those in their negotiating tables, and they also gave a lot of money to the chiefs and the chiefs organizations. They do buying at Harper, for example, would cut severely the AFN. And so it was the Assembly of First Nation, the national organization, but the Liberals restored their funding, and they restored. Harper put in place something where the Indigenous chiefs, they had to be transparent. They had it on their website. They had to show where they spent the money. And the first thing that Trudeau did was take that away. And the chiefs that he was interested in influencing were very happy about that. So I think one of the things that Carney is doing, he's acting more like Harper in many ways, and he's cut off a lot of the feedback loop with the Indigenous people and the chiefs, etc. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was at a point in the not too distant future where there's a more of a sense of uprising as there was with Idle No More. That Trudeau was very good at calming the uprising and I think buying off some people, but that's how politics is done, right? Yeah. And as far as Quebec, I have no idea what's going to happen with Quebec, and that I think you're much more better positioned to see where it's going to go, with especially even the next election in the fall. Yeah.
Is anybody else? I thought I saw a hand.
A quick question for both of you. What is your sense of protest movements? Do you think those, other than making the people who go out, I include myself in that, feel good about trying to do something, do you think they have any influence? And I know Vietnam was a different time though.
Well, I'd say the most successful protest movement in more or less recent times, the last 20 years or something, in Canada, effective, was the one here in Quebec against the Iraq War. And I think that it was one of the biggest anti-Iraq war protests in the world. I think it was like 100,000 people or more came out to protest the Iraq War, and it did keep Canada more or less out of that conflict, out of the Iraq War. Chrétien didn't win, but again, what happened? And this is where the vassal state comes back in. They had to commit then to go to Afghanistan. That once we refused to go into the Iraq War, it was pretty well demanded we go into Afghanistan. But I think protest movements, it's a tool that is essential that it's used. And they're usually not successful, but that's life. Yeah.
Wasn't Afghanistan before Iraq?
Not Canada. Canada wasn't in there. Iraq was 2003. I think Canada went in after Iraq, after 2003 in Afghanistan. I could be wrong. But,
Well, the first Iraq bombing was in the 90s.
The Kuwait War,
Yeah.
really, yeah. Mm-hmm. And we were involved in that.
Yeah.
Carolyn,
Desert
I'm going to
Storm
give you
thing.
a personal and somewhat downcast answer. The personal answer is some years ago, I was a member of the Unitarian Church in Montreal, and both my kids were involved in the youth movement, or youth groups at the Unitarian Church. So we went to a national conference in Ottawa, and there was a young woman there who gave a workshop, if you like. And I knew her slightly because she was the fiancée. She was from Colorado, and she was the fiancée of a young man, a young Canadian man whom we knew. And eventually they called off the engagement, which I think was a very good thing. But her workshop was on why young people were organizing in a much more effective way than us boomers. I don't even like to think of in generational terms like that, but she certainly did. And what she was talking about was the joy of flash mobs, and how by means of social media she could gather together people at an hour's notice, and there could be 1,000 people out on the streets and so on. And she was so goddamn self-satisfied about this. And I don't think flash mobs are any substitute for the long, slow, patient work of organizing and building movement. But the trouble is, everyone is short of time. Everyone has many things on their mind. Organizing that long, slow movement is much more difficult now than it was, when I was young. So I don't think protest movements that just depend on enthusiasm and social media are going to get very far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
First,
just a question for Peter, although Mark can jump in too. And that is, what are your thoughts about separatism in Alberta?
It's a very interesting movement. It seems that doesn't have a lot of broad base, but I think it has to be taken seriously. And I think one of the things that the reason to take it seriously is that U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Brissenden announced that they were having talks with the separatists in Washington. So it could be an interesting wedge for the Americans going down the road. Right now, it's a weak movement. Maybe it might get 30% or something, but who knows? These things, they catch fire.
One more question, maybe? There's a few hands. Yes.
Also, just back to a point that Don here was raising about Minneapolis, really did work to some extent to push ICE out of the city.
Right.
And ultimately led to the resignation of the Homeland Security Secretary. Mind you, there were a couple of shooting deaths involved as well, but it was a very organized resistance there. And other cities as well, they have underground networks that are where neighbors would phone neighbors to alert people that, hey, ICE is here, we spotted them. So there's a good long-term organizing happening there.
Yeah. 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 I
There's
think
No
also
Kings
the
movement as well, right? It's going on.
the what?
The No Kings movement in the United States.
Right.
It
Yeah.
seems to continue on and bubble up every once in a while. And
Yeah.
we see that Trump's popularity is
Yeah.
now in the 30s.
Well, Mark, you say in your book at one point you envy Americans because they get to fight fascism from the inside, that they're in it and they're fighting it. I think for us it's still more abstract. But yeah, definitely. I mean, the stakes are very high in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're right to talk about No Kings and the movement in the protests in Minneapolis and other cities too. The hesitation I have, or the qualm, or the I don't know quite what to do with this, is that the most visible and noisy and one way or another, I don't want to use the word powerful, but the movement that comes to mind in Canada was the Freedom Convoy in 2022, which basically, occupied much of downtown Ottawa for weeks and weeks and caused havoc. And the government at the time refused to do anything to break it up. It's as if the government was very afraid of what would happen with that movement. I don't know, most of us here, not everyone, but I think most of us here would probably call ourselves left of center, but we have to be aware that protest movements, populist movements can form very strongly on the right as well as the left, with consequences that not many of us would like to see.
We have to.
Okay, I just want maybe Fred Anderson could say something, because if somebody who's been involved in a grassroots movement that had a national, like a total American effect, maybe Fred would have something like with the civil rights movement in Mississippi in the 60s, in the South, because that was a major movement, and maybe there's just a couple of words you might want to say about it.
No, but that movement is an example of what Mark was speaking to, that even though it had a spontaneous quality to it, it was a movement that was based on sustained organizing and community building, which was able to force those kinds of significant changes to American society that we unfortunately now seeing being rolled back and abrogated by the Trump administration. But one of the things that's happened, though, is that the ability to build those kinds of coalition among groups no longer exist to a great extent, because one of the things that Trump has been able to do, and the new term is shitification of the whole media ecosystem, is that those groups that you could once build coalitions with, in so many instances now, have been convinced to vote against and support initiatives that are antagonistic to their own interests.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank you very much for that, Fred. And just one sentence more from me on that is that I think what you're talking about, thank God, without using the word, is intersectionality. Yes. And when I remember when Trump was inaugurated in 2017, I remember seeing a big sign calling on people to adopt intersectionality. And I thought, my God, if that's what the left has, is that sort of abstract vocabulary. No. What we need to do is find a vocabulary of resistance and community that doesn't rely on 7-syllable abstract nouns.
Well, on that note, which I didn't quite understand, but yeah, I like intersectionality.
The word.
there we have-
Numb is a better word.
Oh, okay.
That's that effect.
If you want to get yourselves a copy of the book, have the authors sign it. We have just enough time. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for taking part in this conversation. And I hope we have many more conversations like this. And get drunk.
Yeah,
Go
there's
get
wine.
drunk. There's wine.
And there's food.
And there's food.